Hi, I'm Alex Sesta, and this is my partner Jackson Cox. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to talk about the second term of Reagan, which is part of the Reagan Revolution. More specifically, his second election and what he did once he was elected for a second time. Reagan's second election took place in 1984. Reagan and his vice president, George H.W. Bush, were re-elected by a landslide. Going against them was former Vice President Walter Mondale and his running mate Geraldine Ferraro. Ferraro was the first woman to serve on either major party's national ticket. Despite this, Reagan still managed to receive 55% of all of the female votes. Reagan ended up winning 49 of the states and racked up 525 electoral votes compared to Mondale's 13 electoral votes. Reagan's 525 electoral votes are the most for any president so far. So how did Reagan win by such a large margin? Reagan used TV ads to help promote his campaign. His famous ad was called Morning in America. It was an optimistic view of how great America was as a result of his first term. The ad also helped cover over the enormous deficit he had created, which grew from $731 billion to over $2.1 trillion in his first term. On the other hand, Mondale ran a liberal campaign supporting a nuclear freeze and the Equal Rights Amendment. He spoke against the unfairness in Reagan's economic policies and the need to reduce federal budget deficits. Although Mondale was the Democrat candidate, a large portion of Democrats voted for Reagan. These people became known as Reagan's Democrats. Most Reagan Democrats are workers who voted for Reagan because they credited him with the economic recovery, saw Reagan as strong on national security issues, and perceived the Democrats as supporting the poor and minorities at the expense of the middle class. The election of 1984 was actually the last election where the Republican candidate won Hawaii, Massachusetts, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, or Washington. Do you think this was because Reagan was such a strong candidate, or Mondale was a mediocre candidate?
What did Reagan actually do in his second term? Reagan won the election by a landslide, but his second term didn't start out too well. He continued his policies of anti-communism and less government control, but he used illegal methods to fight communism. He sold weapons to Iran in exchange for the release of hostages, and then diverted that money to fund a Contra group of revolutionaries in Nicaragua. This wasn't the only time Reagan had to deal with a hostage crisis. The Middle East was becoming anti-West and anti-Israel. On June 14, 1985, TWA Flight 847 was hijacked by Lebanese militants, and a naval diver was killed. The hijackers wanted the release of 800 Muslim prisoners from Israel and international U.S. condemnation. Reagan met with Lebanese officials 2 weeks later, and the hostages were eventually released. Reagan is commonly well known for what he did for the economy, but what exactly did he do? Reagan also had an economic style known as Reaganomics, where he lowered taxes and created more economic freedom. With this new economic style, GDP grew and unemployment and inflation dropped. Some of the shortcomings to Reaganomics, though, were the high national debt and widening wage gap. While Reagan was strongly anti-communist, during his second term, relations with the Soviet Union became more favorable. Reagan and Gorbachev met several times, and although they couldn't agree on several things, including a U.S. Space Force, they did make the first ever nuclear arms reduction agreement. He also made a trip to Berlin and spoke at the Berlin Wall, where he challenged Gorbachev to tear it down and bring peace and prosperity to all the satellite nations. Now it's time for the primary source. Either I get the author right, or I get shot. We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. This is Reagan's tear down this wall speech. Bet. Reagan gave this speech in reference to the Berlin Wall. He demanded that Gorbachev, the Soviet Union dictator, tore down the wall that was keeping East Berlin isolated from West Berlin and the rest of the Western world. Reagan left office with the highest approval rating of any president ever at 68%. The economy was flourishing after a period of stagnation, and he is generally looked back upon as one of our greatest presidents. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week. This video is made possible by these people. If you want to keep watching Crash Course videos for free, please consider subscribing and liking the video. Also, let us know what you think. Was Ronald Reagan a successful president?